চরণ তলে একলা তলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় করে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো রে
Thank you for joining the live stream. I am new on OBS and I have no idea what I'm doing, and I have no idea how many people are watching this. Let's see, I don't think anybody is yet. Okay, anyway, so after a long time we are back with discussing our social science papers, and I've stumbled upon this fascinating paper from 2013, and there has been other research work on this topic as well. And I am connecting that to casteism. The paper is not really on caste. It's not even exactly a social science paper. I think it's a cross-discipline paper. But I am connecting it to caste and actually noticing that this oddly seems to connect with untouchability absolutely perfectly. And this might be the historical origins of a concept like untouchability. Okay, let's start, guys. I hope the audio is coming fine. Oh, finally I can see the chat here. Oh my god, thank god. But I can't reply to it as of yet. Okay, what's happening now? What's happening? This is the chat. Okay, this works. Everything is docked up here. Great, audio good, right? Oh, nice. Let's see, what do I have to do? Window capture, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is the one. Okay, now I need to decrease my size. Can you all see the paper? Can you all see anything written on the paper? I'll try to make it as visible as possible. It's kind of visible, right? Yeah, I think it's working. Okay, let's see. All this kind of stuff is absolutely a mindfuck on OBS. Okay, I'm having a little trouble with the okay, I'll see the live chat from here, but I can't read it from here. Don't think it was only disease, but antisocial behaviors too. Nothing is ever only one reason. But this setup is a bit makeshift. Have you switched from StreamYard? No, StreamYard, I don't have money to subscribe to StreamYard right now. Okay. I think it's pretty visible and it's looking kind of nice. Let's start then. So I'll put this window here, and I look very weird looking up every time I'm looking at my other monitor, but my other monitor is is way above. That's why I have to keep looking this way. Yeah. Okay. So guys, this is the paper. Pathogens and Politics. Further evidence that parasite prevalence predicts authoritarianism. And wherever there is a prevalent of pathogens and epidemics, etc., parasite prevalence, there I guess there is a higher chances of stuff like authoritarianism. Why, we will learn that from the paper, as well as untouchability. But like Anand is pointing out here, everywhere people do antisocial behaviors and get banished and stuff, but nowhere is untouchability specifically mentioned, elaborated, and codified, etc., into theology. So there was something distinct going on in India, not in the case of casteism in general, but specifically untouchability. That is a distinctly interesting phenomenon. So the abstract of the paper says, according to a parasite stress hypothesis, this is from 2013, okay, there has been further work on this, but this is the more famous one. This is from the famous journal PLOS 1. According to a parasite stress hypothesis, authoritarian governments are more likely to emerge in regions characterized by a high prevalence of disease-causing pathogens. Recent cross-national evidence is consistent with this hypothesis, but there are inferential limitations associated with that evidence. We report 2 studies that address some of these limitations and provide further tests of the hypothesis. Study 1 revealed that parasite prevalence strongly predicted cross-national differences on measures assessing individuals' authoritarian personalities, and this effect statistically mediated the relationship between parasite prevalence and authoritarian governance. The mediation result is inconsistent with an alternative explanation for previous findings. To address further limitations associated with cross-national comparisons, Study 2 tested the parasite stress hypothesis on a sample of traditional small-scale societies, which is the standard cross-cultural sample. Results revealed that parasite prevalence predicted measures of authoritarian governance and did so even when statistically controlling for other threats to human welfare. One additional threat, famine, also uniquely predicted authoritarianism. That too we can see from Islam in general. Of a scarcity mindset, a povertarian mindset will of course always lead to things like communism and Islam. Together, these results further substantiate the parasite stress hypothesis of authoritarianism and suggest that societal differences in authoritarian governance result in part from cultural differences in individuals' authoritarian personalities. The outcasting of Yakuza. Was that an exile or a specific practice of untouchability? And repeatedly we get to Japan as the closest representation, and Japan, interestingly, is part of the Sanatan civilizational culture. So then the blame squarely lies on Sanatan civilizational cultures again. But what was distinct about Japan and India then? If at all that is exactly analogous to untouchability. Systems of governance differ widely, and one important dimension on which they vary is authoritarianism. In contrast to liberal democratic forms of governance, authoritarian governance is defined by highly concentrated power structures that repress dissent and emphasize submission to authority, social conformity, and hostility towards outgroups. Why is governance in some states and societies more authoritarian than in others? Economic variables, including the overall availability of economic resources and the manner in which those resources are distributed, provide partial answers to that question. Ecological variables may play a role as well. Recently, it has been suggested that societal variability in authoritarian governance may result, in part, from variability in the prevalence of disease-causing parasites. In this context, parasite is used to refer broadly to any pathogenic organism, including bacteria and viruses, as well as helminths. So the author is kind of clarifying that by parasite, we don't mean the Mughals like Irfan Habib did. Although results from several initial studies support this parasite stress hypothesis of authoritarian governance, alternative explanations for those results remain unaddressed. Here, we report results from 2 additional investigations designed to test the parasite stress hypothesis and to address inferential limitations of previous studies. Why might there be a causal link between the prevalence of infectious diseases in the local ecology and an authoritarian system of governance? The hypothesis follows from an analysis of several defining characteristics of authoritarian political systems, such as institutionalized emphasis on social conformity. Yeah, this is what we are talking about. Institutionalized emphasis on social conformity, intolerance of dissent, and ethnocentrism. That may have implications for the spread of infectious disease. Because many disease-causing parasites are invisible and their actions mysterious, disease control has historically depended substantially on adherence to ritualized behavior practices that reduced infection risk. Individuals who openly dissented from or simply failed to conform to these behavioral traditions therefore posed a health threat to self and others. Thus, while there can be societal costs associated with any collective behavioral tendency toward obedience and conformity, there can be disease-specific benefits too. For example, presuming that a greater proportion of these behavioral traditions serve to mitigate rather than propagate the spread of disease. These benefits would have been greater and more likely to outweigh the costs under circumstances in which disease-causing parasites placed greater stress on human welfare, circumstances in which those parasites were especially virulent and or prevalent. This logical analysis has implications for predictable variation in individuals' attitudes and values, and for worldwide societal differences too. At a psychological level of analysis, empirical evidence reveals that the subjective perception of infection risk causes individuals to be more conformist, to prefer conformity and obedience in others, to respond more negatively toward others who fail to conform, and to endorse more conservative socio-political attitudes. At a societal level of analysis, empirical evidence reveals that in countries and cultures characterized by historically higher prevalence of parasitic diseases, people are less individualistic, exhibit lower levels of dispositional openness to new things, are more likely to conform to majority opinion, and more strongly endorse quote-unquote binding moral values that emphasize group loyalty, obedience, and respect for authority. In addition to their tolerance of nonconformity, authoritarian political systems are also characterized by nepotism and ethnocentrism. These behavioral tendencies, too, have been empirically linked to the threat of disease. At a psychological level of analysis, individuals who are or who merely perceive themselves to be more vulnerable to infection tend to endorse more xenophobic and ethnocentric attitudes. So, when you cringe extra hard at minimal uncleanliness, and if you have low verbal IQ, that means you will be authoritarian everywhere all around you, but then that behavior becomes societal. At a societal level of analysis, countries characterized by higher prevalence of parasitic diseases are also characterized by stronger family ties, increased frequency of intrastate ethnic conflict, and several indicators of increased ethnocentrism, although the interpretation of some of these results remains a matter of some disagreement. To the extent that institutionalized forms of governance reflect the attitudes and values of the individuals who populate the local ecology, these lines of research have implications for predicting worldwide variability in authoritarian governance. In places where parasitic diseases have posed greater stress on human wealth and welfare, authoritarian forms of governance may be especially likely to emerge and to persist over time. Wait, I need to decrease the size of my Google Chrome. It's not in sync because it's OBS. I'll have to do something in OBS. I think I'll have to delay the video. But see, otherwise the video quality and audio quality is so much better than StreamYard. That's why I like OBS in the end more than StreamYard. Let me check the comments a little and I'll have a sip of water. As someone suffering from clinical OCD, I can understand how hard it is to be truly clean, especially for rituals. People got banished for behavior that was incredibly disruptive to ordered society, and their descendants aren't given a chance to redeem themselves. So you don't understand the difference between untouchability and banishment, Anand? Is that what you're saying? Okay, our TMC supporting Komi is saying SBI has shifted 3 departments from Kolkata to Mumbai in June. This is Vikash under double engine Sarkar. Earlier we had Mamta to blame. What about now? Who will you blame? It's still Mamta. In 3 months, the GDP growth rate is going to go where? $5,000. So that SBI and all the biggest banks will now happily open their shops in Kolkata. Saurav is saying in Hindu scriptures we have concept of mlechas. Even non-Vedic communities are sometimes described as mlechas in Vedas. Can this lead to exclusivity, thus untouchability? No. Every group has in-group, out-group problems, bawal, fights, genocide, massacres. Untouchability is a distinct societal phenomenon. Material milieu affects human consciousness. India's climate is insane. This heat and the rains, best place for things rotting and parasites forming. Any thoughts on Justice Yashwant Verma's corruption charges being... I've never heard of Justice Yashwant Verma, and I don't give a shit about that when I'm discussing this topic. Neeraj, till now you did not answer Salvatore Babones on Christian conversion or proselytization is okay. I did remember seeing that video, but I don't remember what exactly his argument was. So today again I can't answer you. After you said it that day, I left the live. After we got over with the live stream, I did check it out, but then I forgot about it. What the hell is today's topic? Today's topic is, did a prevalence of disease, parasites, pathogens lead to the behavior called untouchability? Where did my paper go? Okay, here is the paper. Okay, the paper is in a weird spot. Let me increase the size a little. Okay, this is the OBS. Oh my god. Yeah, this works, right? Yeah, this is better. No, this doesn't work. This works. Oh, my OBS. Okay, let's continue now. हाँ 3 মাসে SBI चाहिए और 3 মাসে SBI এর বিল্ডিংও তৈরি হবে না. And besides, guys, judges and SBI employees are the only ones whom you should never invite in a debate, because they might leave in the middle of a debate because they have a puja or a holiday or a lunch, etc. I hope you know this book by Cathy Stewart, who claims untouchability existed in Europe in history. Yeah, might be for the same reasons. Because the paper's argument is that untouchability leads to authoritarianism. Therefore, Hitler used to bathe 5 times a day because he was a cleanliness, hygiene-obsessed OCD guy. So, if Germany can have that, why wouldn't the rest of Europe? Please do live stream on Nityanand Mishra podcast on Vad on pseudoscience. No, I can't afford to lose more subscribers. Vad has many subscribers. Let him lose subscribers. Bye. I am against 2 Abrahamic religion, hellbent. I will be ready to die for my civilization or dharma, my gut religion. War will happen. How many push-ups can you do, Kumar Reddy? During COVID, East Asians became everyone became untouchables. We were asked to be untouchables and practice untouchability. Okay, let's continue. These results remain a matter of desire. To the extent that institutionalized forms of governance reflects the attitudes and values of the individuals who populate the local ecology, these lines of research have implications for predicting worldwide variability in authoritarian governance, which is, in places where parasitic diseases have posed greater stress on human health and welfare, authoritarian forms of governance may be especially likely to emerge and to persist over time. Thornhill and colleagues empirically tested this parasite stress hypothesis using modern geopolitical entities, for example, countries, as units of analysis. The hypothesis was tested on 4 different measures of democratization and/or authoritarianism, using a parasite stress measure derived from a modern epidemiological database. Consistent evidence was observed across all measures. Higher levels of parasite stress were associated with less democratic, more highly authoritarian political systems. These relationships remained statistically significant when statistically controlling for measures of economic development and economic inequality. Additional analyses have revealed that country-level differences in authoritarian governance were even more strongly predicted by a measure of historical rather than modern-day parasite prevalence. Holy shit. A finding consistent with the hypothesis that authoritarian governance is a consequence rather than a cause of parasite stress. However, non-trivial inferential issues, anumana pramana, arise from the use of contemporary nation states as units of analysis. Until these issues are addressed empirically, it is difficult to draw confident conclusions about the relationship between parasite stress and authoritarian governance. One issue pertains to the history of European colonization and its consequences. When countries colonize other geographic regions, they often impose their own political and economic institutions onto those regions. Those institutions may persist even after those regions attain independence. It has been argued that ecological variables, such as the prevalence of infectious diseases, predict societal outcomes primarily because of their influence on particular patterns of colonial settlement, such that European colonial powers were more likely to establish long-lasting democratic political systems and economic institutions in regions characterized by lower incidences of infectious diseases. This represents a very different causal process than that implied by the parasite stress hypothesis. This is how you do research, guys. You uphold the opposite argument as well. We conducted 2 separate investigations using 2 different empirical strategies to address this inferential issue and thus to more rigorously test the hypothesized relation between parasite stress and authoritarian governance. The first study revisits the country-level analysis reported previously, the alternative explanation, differential colonial establishment of political institutions, is tested by examining relations not only between disease prevalence and state-level authoritarianism evident in government institutions, but also by examining the relation between those variables and authoritarian attitudes expressed by individuals who populate the country. The colonial establishment of institutions explanation implies a direct causal influence of disease prevalence on state-level authoritarian governance, which may in turn have downstream consequences for individual-level authoritarian attitudes. Conversely, the parasite stress hypothesis implies a more direct causal influence of disease prevalence on individuals' authoritarian attitudes, which in turn would be expected to have a consequential influence on state-level systems of government. In statistical analytic terms, the alternative explanation implies an indirect relation between disease prevalence and individuals' authoritarian attitudes that is statistically mediated by authoritarian governance, whereas the parasite stress hypothesis implies an indirect relation between disease prevalence and authoritarian governance that is statistically mediated by individuals' authoritarian attitudes. In addition to testing the alternative explanation, the results of this study also have implications for our understanding of individual-level authoritarian attitudes as they relate to societal outcomes. Research on the authoritarian personality of individuals indicates some relation between politically entrenched authoritarian systems of governance and individually expressed authoritarian personality traits. As such, governments and individuals have in common their emphasis on adherence to conventional values, repression of dissent, and devotion to order and hierarchy. But the direction of causality is unclear. To what extent does the correlation reflect the influence of government institutions on individuals' personalities versus the influence of individuals' personalities on systems of governance? By introducing an additional variable into the analysis and testing statistical mediation, our results may contribute toward some resolution to this question. The second study further addresses alternative explanations based on European colonialism by testing the parasite stress hypothesis on a sample of more traditional societies documented within the standard cross-cultural sample. The standard cross-cultural sample, or SCCS, consists of 186 worldwide cultural populations, many of which are small-scale aboriginal societies. Cashdan and Steele employed the SCCS dataset to test several other hypothesized consequences of disease prevalence that had previously been tested only with cross-national comparisons. Their results provided important substantiation for the relationship between disease prevalence and collectivist values, especially those values pertaining to adherence to group forms. We employed the same strategy to provide an empirically complementary test of the hypothesis that ecological variation in disease prevalence predicts societal variation in authoritarian governance. Drawing on an extensive ethnographic database, the cultures that comprise the SCCS are described by hundreds of numerically coded variables gathered by dozens of different ethnographers, including multiple variables pertaining to systems of governance. These variables, in conjunction with 2 indicators of disease prevalence, allow a statistically rigorous test of the relation between parasite stress and authoritarian governance in small-scale societies. Additional variables assess the prevalence of conceptually distinct threats to human welfare within these societies, for example, famine and warfare. This allowed us to test the unique predicative effects of parasite stress, while statistically controlling for any effects associated with these other threats. Do we bother about the method? I don't think we need to. We will check out the conclusion now, because the introduction is over. This is meant to be a short live stream anyway. I'm not interested in the methodology. If you all want to listen to the methodology, please mention in the live chat, then I'll go through it. I'll just go to the results and discussion section. Preliminary analysis revealed that pathogen prevalence strongly predicated all 4 measures of authoritarian governance. These results replicate previous findings on the smaller subset of countries included in our analysis. Additional results revealed that individuals' authoritarianism scores were strongly predicated by pathogen prevalence. Individual authoritarianism was also predicated by GDP per capita, Gini, education, and life expectancy residual. These are the tables if anybody is interested. You all can go to the paper anyway. Just Google PLOS1, P-L-O-S-O-N-E, PLOS1, pathogen authoritarianism. Search this on Google, you will find it on Google. In order to test unique effects on individuals' authoritarian scores, pathogen prevalence and the 4 control variables were entered simultaneously as predicators into a regression equation with individual authoritarianism as a dependent variable. Results revealed that the predicative effects of the control variables were all statistically non-significant, but that despite relatively low statistical power, there was a significant unique effect of pathogen prevalence. The partial correlation coefficient between pathogen prevalence and authoritarian scores when controlling for these 4 control variables was R is equal to 0.48 and P is equal to 0.04. This result is conceptually consistent with previous research linking pathogen prevalence uniquely to other conformist attitudes and personality traits, i.e. untouchability. The key question is whether the relation between pathogen prevalence and authoritarian governance is mediated by individual level authoritarianism. To address this question, we employed a bootstrapping procedure. We determined path coefficients by regression analysis and determined indirect effects and their 95% confidence intervals based upon 10,000 non-parametric bootstrapped samples. Results of all 4 mediation tests indicated that the relation between pathogen prevalence and authoritarian governance was significantly mediated by individual authoritarianism, with none of the bootstrapped confidence intervals containing 0. The mediated effect accounted for 77% of the total effect of pathogen prevalence on political rights. One of the 4 measures of authoritarian governance, only for the measure of property rights did the direct effect of pathogen prevalence remain significant when statistically controlling for individual authoritarianism. For the remaining 3 measures of authoritarian governance, the direct effect of pathogen prevalence was reduced to non-significance. For the sake of comparison, we performed another set of bootstrapping analysis that tested an alternative mediational model that specified authoritarian governance as the mediator between pathogen prevalence and individual authoritarianism. This alternative model was not as well supported by the data. Across the 4 analyses, the mediated effect accounted for between 31 to 48% of the total effect of pathogen prevalence on individual authoritarianism. The direct effect of pathogen prevalence on individual authoritarianism remained significant in every analysis when controlling for state-level authoritarian governance. Study 2. Let's go to the prevalence of disease-causing parasites. Let's see what they found in study 2. We conducted parallel sets of analysis employing 2 different measures of parasite prevalence. One measure was developed by Caste and Steele based upon the historical prevalence of 10 disease-causing pathogens. These authors employed the same source materials employed by Murray and Schaller, who are the authors of this study as well, and authors of this paper, and are the people who did the study 1, and assigned a historical pathogen prevalence score to each of the 186 SCCS societies based upon local conditions within 200 kilometers of each society. The specific pathogens coded were Leishmanias, Trypanosomes, malaria, Schistosomes, filari, dengue, typhus, leprosy, spirochetes, and plague. This measure was internally reliable. Cronbach's alpha is equal to 0.81. The SCCS dataset includes 3 variables that assess regular shortages in nutritional resources of the sort that predict chronic malnutrition, ordinary malnutrition, short-term starvation, and seasonal starvation. Each variable is coded on a 4-point scale. We created a single index by first converting the 3 variables to z-scores and then computing the mean of these z-scores for the 3-item scale. Cronbach's alpha is equal to 0.63. Famine is going to be ignored anyway. Okay, let's see the results and the discussion surrounding study 2. Table 2 presents zero order correlations between variables. Results from analysis. Zero order correlations between 12 item index of authoritarian governance, 2 measures of parasite stress, and 3 measures assessing other threats to health and welfare. We conducted follow-up multiple regression analysis to test whether parasite stress uniquely predicted authoritarian governance, even when controlling for additional threats. Okay, they are just apologizing and explaining themselves that they did a very rigorous study and not a random bullshit study. So we will take them at face value here and general discussion. Results from both studies provide empirical substantiation for the hypothesis that societal differences in authoritarian governance may result, in part, from ecological variation in the prevalence of disease-causing parasites. Study 1 was designed to address one specific alternative explanation for a previously documented relation between parasite stress and contemporary nation-level markers of authoritarianism. Results revealed that the relation between parasite prevalence and authoritarian governance was mediated by individual authoritarianism, a result that is consistent with the parasite stress hypothesis and inconsistent with an alternative explanation based solely on the colonial spread of political and economic institutions. Nice. These results do not challenge the important role of colonial history in explaining contemporary nation-level differences in political and economic outcomes, obviously. The results simply indicate that a colonial spread of institutions process that cannot provide a complete examination for the relation between parasite prevalence and authoritarianism. No, untouchables were not forced to live in unhygienic conditions. Their professions made their lifestyles unhygienic. Study 2 was designed to provide a complementary analysis in a sample of traditional small-scale societies. Results revealed that parasite prevalence predicted the level of authoritarian governance across a diverse sample of 90 small-scale societies within the standard cross-cultural sample. These results provide further empirically independent evidence of the hypothesized relation between parasite stress and authoritarian governance. The magnitude of the statistical relationships between parasite prevalence and authoritarian governance differed across the two studies. These relations were more modest in the sample of small-scale societies than in the sample of modern geopolitical regions. Why might this be? One possibility is that when using contemporary nation-states as units of analysis, the relationship is more likely to be spuriously inflated, for instance, due to conceptually independent processes such as those involved in European colonialism. Another possibility is that when using the SCCS dataset, the relationship is more likely to be artificially attenuated due to the measurement error that almost certainly attends any attempt to turn ethnographers' qualitative observations into numerical codings. These considerations suggest caution in drawing any conclusions about actual effect sizes and attest further to the value of using multiple methods and multiple samples to test functional hypotheses of cross-cultural differences. In addition to parasite prevalence, Study 2 also assessed several additional conceptually distinct forms of threat to human welfare: malnutrition, famine, and warfare. Results revealed that both parasite prevalence and famine uniquely predicted variability in authoritarian governance. These results suggest that the societal implications of parasite stress and the societal implications of famine are distinct from the implications of other variables that might also affect individual fitness and mortality. This conclusion is consistent also with psychological evidence showing that while other threats can also influence individuals' conformist and ethnocentric attitudes, the perceived threat of infectious disease has effects that are empirically unique and often especially powerful. The finding that the threat of famine predicts authoritarian governance in small-scale societies is also convergent with psychological research showing that individual-level authoritarianism is generally higher during times of resource scarcity, hence Islam, with the birth of Islam. Two other threats to human welfare, i.e. malnutrition and warfare, had negligible relations with authoritarian governance in small-scale societies. Malnutrition may fail to exact any substantial societal-based influence due to its chronic and enduring nature, whereas famines are acute and therefore more threat-like. The null result for warfare is perhaps more surprising, given the prevailing belief that authoritarian governments are more likely to go to war. This null result may simply be due to scale. The warlike nature of authoritarian regimes has typically been ascribed to large nation states. The same principles may not apply to small-scale societies of the sort represented in the SCCS. Although these empirical results provide evidence that ecological variation in parasite stress as well as famine uniquely predicts societal level differences in authoritarian governance, these results cannot address deeper questions about the specific underlying processes through which this relation may have emerged. Although the pattern of results is consistent with previous research in the psychological sciences that documents specific cognitive and behavioral changes that occur when individuals perceive that they are vulnerable to infectious diseases, additional mechanisms may also plausibly explain the same societal outcomes. Nor can these kinds of results distinguish whether the unique effects of parasite stress and famine reflect the operation of a single underlying mechanism that responds to any kind of stressor or threat, or whether these two effects reflect the complementary operation of multiple mechanisms that are each functionally attuned to different forms of threat. A simple appeal to parsimony favors the former interpretation. Considerable evidence at an individual level of analysis, including experiments that reveal different effects of different threats on attitudes relevant to authoritarianism, suggests the latter. Although one cannot confidently draw inferences about individual level processes from population level data, the results of study 1 may have other implications at the psychological level of analysis. It has been suggested that an authoritarian personality serves a self-protective function. Consequently, rather than being a stable trait, individuals' authoritarian tendencies may temporarily increase when threats are psychologically salient. Our results provide novel evidence of a relationship between a conceptually distinct form of threat, which is the threat of infectious disease, and individuals' authoritarian tendencies. This relationship is consistent with a wide range of additional evidence indicating that individuals are sensitive to disease-connoting cues within their immediate environment, therefore untouchability, according to me, and respond to these cues with functionally adaptive shifts in cognition and behavior. These results have further implications for understanding the direction of the presumed causal relation between individual level authoritarian attitudes and state level authoritarian governance. Are people who live within authoritarian states more likely to adopt authoritarian attitudes, or are people who hold authoritarian attitudes more likely to give rise to authoritarian governments? By including an additional variable, which is parasite prevalence in this case, and using mediation analysis to test the direct and indirect implications of this variable, Study 1 addressed these questions in a novel manner. Results suggest that, consistent with some lines of speculation, individual level authoritarianism shapes political systems rather than political systems shaping individual attitudes, although of course neither causal path necessarily operates at the exclusion of the other. In addition to their conceptual implications, these results may also have useful implications for predicting the collateral consequences of health-related public policies. If indeed parasite stress has unique causal implications for authoritarian governance, then disease eradication programs may not only have direct consequences for human health, they may also have indirect consequences for individual rights, civil liberties, and political freedoms. There may also be implications for reduced levels of xenophobia and other prejudices that are linked to authoritarian attitudes, and for increased levels of creativity, innovation, and open-mindedness more generally. And no wonder is Islam born in such a situation, but also Muslims today are most Muslims in India today are in relatively unhygienic professions, and therefore their xenophobia continues, their authoritarianism continues. This paper is over. Getting the hang of OBS finally. Let's check out the comments, and I'll come back in half an hour or so with another podcast, with another live stream, discussing finally an idea I've come up with, the true alternative to reservations. If at all the government wants to, has to, must step in, if everybody admits that the government has to step in for the benefit of the lower castes, there is a better thing to do than reservations. I will discuss that in the next live stream. Let me check out some comments here. Dataset টা একটু দেখে নাও গুগলে গিয়ে, just Google search typing clause 1 pathogens authoritarianism 2013 paper. Okay, I feel untouchability is purely a climate socio-economic phenomenon where religion was unfairly dragged and stitched with it forcibly. The famine-like situation affects economy and then society. Rohan Jagtap. Okay, Rohan Jagtap. I'm in agreement with 50% of your statement and in disagreement with 50% of your statement. Okay. Yes, you are right. Untouchability is purely a climate socio-economic phenomenon, but religion was not unfairly dragged into it. Religion had to be dragged in because in some societies, especially in a pre-enlightenment, pre-Renaissance era, pre-secular humanism, modern state era, in that era, religion had to be brought into everything. See, in a post-Darwinian society, in a post-Darwinian world, you have to understand that the place of religion and God in our minds, in our society, is completely different. That has fundamentally changed. That has intrinsically changed. You cannot get back to that situation anymore. You live in a post-Darwinian society, and therefore God and religion will be a different thing to you than it was for the pre-Darwinian world. For them, religion was science. Priests, pastors, Brahmins were either the mediators of God or basically gods themselves, or who could say or simply blabber about what God wants and doesn't want. In a post-Darwinian society, religion is a separate thing. You can't blame the Constitution or Raja Ram Mohan Roy for this. Today, religion is not the main thing in our lives. In nobody's life is religion the main thing. Except Muslims maybe, which is why they are far behind in every fucking thing. And God is a different thing today. Mostly, at best, what we are doing today is a fancy dress competition. We are pretending religion and God is exactly as important to us in the same exact ways as it was in a pre-Darwinian world. So in that society, in that Indian society, what would be done other than bringing religion into this discourse? So religion was not being unfairly dragged. Religion was there. It wanted to be dragged. It wanted to lead the fight or discourse on everything. And there is another example to make my case stronger, which is, let's say, why did Ambedkar, forever talking about atheism, abusing of religion, etc., in order to convince people of his anti-caste agenda, why did he need religion as well? Because India is a backward country and used to be more backward during Ambedkar's time. Therefore, he realized, which is very true even today, because we are still kind of backward, that associate any cause with a god and religion, every fucking idiot will be on board with you. That is why he did that. He knew that if it is just a random theory that people talk about and have debates on, this shit is going nowhere. It will take maybe 30 more years. And there lies the core failure of Savarkar. The core difference between Savarkar and Ambedkar. If today Libertarian Party of India consecrates a libertarian god, gives it some Sanskrit name, okay? Swarajyadev, okay? Or Swarajdev, and opens a temple, 90% of India will be libertarian tomorrow morning. So, is Libertarian Party of India then bringing religion into this unfairly? No. You can look at this either of two ways. A, yes, people are dumb fucks, give them religion to convince them. Or two, why shouldn't things happen through religion? Religion is supposed to be the model driving force of the contemporary society and country at any given point. So that's what's going on. That is what Shiny was also trying with her Shivling controversy. That just using God to spread a positive health message. Bharat Mata ke appropriate korte hobe. Ambedkar himself kind of agreed on this in his work, The Untouchables, right? No, I don't know. I have not read it. I have only read Annihilation of Caste. You can do a series of podcasts on Ambedkar's riddles in Hinduism. Why? Okay then. See you all soon, guys. See you all in half an hour. Savarkar tried to detach Hindutva from religion. While his method is ideal, the society was and still is not there yet. Yes. So if you want a diluted and more retarded version of Hindutva, but you want it to succeed today, right fucking now, yeah, do what Ambedkar did. Which is BJP? What is BJP? That is what BJP is actually doing. That is what RSS does. Hence Ram Navami in Bengal. Hence finding out new gods in order to spread their message. RSS realized this from the failure of Savarkar. Exactly. See you all in half an hour, guys.
তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা তলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় করে তবে বজ্রা দলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা চলো